The score was 20-18.
Not in the match, in a single tiebreak.
Philipp Kohlschreiber had 7 match points against the #1 player in the world. 7 separate moments where one shot, one clean execution of the game he had practiced 10,000 times would have ended it. He converted none of them. And at some point during that tiebreak, something so strange happened that it almost went unnoticed. Both players forgot to change ends at 15-15. They simply kept playing, lost in the pressure, until the chair umpire corrected them at 16-16. The crowd barely reacted, because by then everyone watching already understood. This wasn't just a tennis match anymore. This was a man unraveling in real time, point by point, in front of the entire sport. That was Philipp Kohlschreiber. Not the loss, the forgetting. For 2 decades, he was one of the most technically gifted players on the ATP Tour. A backhand so precise, so aesthetically complete, that commentators reached for only one comparison: Roger Federer. He won titles on clay, on grass, on hard courts. He defeated Grand Slam champions, top 10 players, men 10 years younger than him. He built a career worth nearly $14 million in prize money alone, becoming the 49th highest earner in the history of professional tennis. And yet, when the sport needed him to be great, when the scoreboard demanded it, something inside him stopped working. Not his technique, not his footwork, something deeper, something that no amount of practice could fix. Because the problem wasn't in his racket. It was in the space between knowing what to do and being able to do it when it mattered most. There is a word for that space. In German, they might call it the place where talent goes to die. He grew up in Augsburg, a city that produces engineers and precision. And Kohlschreiber was both. From the moment he turned professional, his game was a study in controlled geometry. Flat trajectories, deep ground strokes, a one-handed backhand that loaded spin and direction with the economy of a master craftsman. He was not a power player. He was a thinking player, someone who read the geometry of the court the way a chess player reads the board. 3 moves ahead, calculating angles, never wasting motion. By his mid-20s, he was consistently inside the top 30, top 20, occasionally threatening the top 15. The German tennis establishment, still hungry after the retirements of Boris Becker and Michael Stick, watched him closely. Maybe this was the one. Maybe this quiet, precise man from Augsburg would restore the nation's place at the top of the sport. He gave them reasons to believe. In Melbourne, against Andy Roddick, then one of the most feared servers in the game, Kohlschreiber served 32 aces in a single match and hit 104 winners across 5 brutal sets. In Paris, on clay, he dismantled Novak Djokovic in straight sets when Djokovic was ranked 4th in the world. At Wimbledon, he reached the quarterfinals, his best result at a Grand Slam, and briefly climbed to a career-high ranking of world number 16. For a player of his generation, surrounded by the greatest dynasty the sport had ever seen, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, reaching number 16 was not failure. It was extraordinary. The problem was that Kohlschreiber never quite believed that, because for every brilliant win, the data was quietly building a different story. Sports analysts who study performance under pressure have a classification system. They divide players into groups based on how their win probability changes in critical moments: break points, tie breaks, deciding sets, match points. The best players, the champions, show a slight increase in performance when the pressure rises. They are called clutch. And then there is another group, statistically defined, measurable, documented, called tight. These are the players whose win probability drops sharply the moment the score becomes critical. Not because of physical failure, because of something happening in the mind. An overestimation of the importance of each point, a mental loop that transforms a break point into a wall, a match point into a cliff edge. Kohlschreiber was placed firmly in this group, not by opinion, by data. He exaggerated the weight of critical moments. Every big point became, in his mind, bigger than it was. And the bigger it felt, the harder his body locked. His grip tightened, his swing shortened. The geometry he read so brilliantly became inaccessible, buried under the noise of what the point meant. It was, in clinical terms, a dysfunction of heuristics, a failure of the mental shortcuts that allow athletes to act instinctively under pressure. But in human terms, it was something simpler and more painful. He knew exactly what he needed to do, and he could not do it. The cruel irony is that this is precisely what made him great. The same intelligence that allowed him to read the court, to calculate angles, to adapt tactically to any surface. That intelligence became his enemy when the moment demanded that he stop thinking and simply act. Champions do not think on match point. Kohlschreiber could not stop thinking, and the sport, as it always does, found his weakness and pressed it over and over until it became his identity. Then came November 2007, and the story turned darker than anyone expected. A German newspaper published what it described as a list of 30 professional tennis players suspected of match fixing. Philipp Kohlschreiber's name was on it, not buried, prominent. The paper called him, by its own characterization, the worst case among those listed. The accusation arrived with no formal charges, no evidence presented publicly, no due process, just his name in print in his own country, attached to the most corrosive accusation a professional athlete can face. He called it a scandal. He called it a slander against his name and his reputation. He fought to separate himself from the allegation with everything he had. But here is what made the accusation uniquely devastating. It was indistinguishable from the outside from the truth. A player who was statistically documented to lose at critical moments. A player whose win probability collapsed under pressure. Looked, to anyone who did not understand the psychology, exactly like a player who was losing on purpose. The data that proved his mental fragility could be read, by a hostile eye, as the data of a cheat. He was trapped inside his own pattern. The collapse that was real, that was psychological, that was beyond his control. That collapse had become his alibi, and his alibi had become his accusation. He was never formally charged. The allegation faded without resolution. But in Germany, the damage was done. The German tennis establishment, which had already viewed him with a complicated mixture of pride and disappointment, began to pull away. Conflicts with Davis Cup captains escalated. He was accused of influencing the removal of team officials. His response? "I'm the bad guy. As soon as I say something, I'm the bad guy anyway," became his public posture. Defensive and exhausted, and not entirely wrong. And in Frankfurt, in February 2014, playing for his country on home soil, Philipp Kohlschreiber was booed by the German crowd, his own people, in his own language, while he was representing them. If you understand that tennis is just the stage for much bigger human battles, for identity, for belonging, for the right to be seen clearly, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. He kept playing. That, in its own way, was the most remarkable thing about him. Through the accusations, through the exile, through the boos, through the years of statistical documentation of his own psychological limits, he kept showing up. He reached his mid-30s, still inside the top 50, still winning matches on all three surfaces, still producing backhands that made younger players stop and watch. His body held 21 years as a professional, and his physical durability was almost without parallel in the modern game. But the hunger was leaving. He could feel it going, slowly, the way light leaves a room in the late afternoon, gradually, and then all at once. On the 1st of August 2018, in Kitzbühel, Austria, Philipp Kohlschreiber married Lena Alberti in the morning. A few hours later, he walked onto a clay court and played a professional tennis match. he lost. And afterward, in the press conference, he was honest in the way that only exhausted people can be honest. There was nothing left in the tank. He was not talking about the match. He was talking about something larger, a reservoir that had been draining for years, quietly, beneath the victories and the losses and the data and the accusations. And that on this particular day, on the day he chose to begin the rest of his life, had finally run dry. He played for 4 more years. He did not make it loud. There was no farewell tour, no emotional press conferences in major stadiums, no tributes from the governing bodies of the sport. In June 2022, at the qualifying rounds for Wimbledon, at a practice facility in Roehampton, a place most tennis fans have never heard of, Philipp Kohlschreiber lost a match and walked off the court for the last time as a professional. He had simply woken up that morning and known it was the right day to stop. He described the aftermath as something close to euphoria. For the first time in 21 years, no one was structuring his life around a sport. He could make his own breakfast. He could sit with his wife without calculating recovery time. He could be, for the first time since childhood, a man who was not also a machine designed to compete. He became a mentor to a 17-year-old player, a young German named Justin Engel, who had the physical explosiveness that Kohlschreiber no longer possessed, and who needed what Kohlschreiber had in abundance: the knowledge of what it feels like when the moment is too large, when the point becomes a wall, when the body locks and the mind races, and the geometry disappears. He could not give Engel his own youth back, but he could give him something more precise: the map of every place where the mind breaks down, drawn from 21 years of personal experience. The 49th highest earner in the history of his sport. A player who was defeated by Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and Murray, and who still beat all 4 of them at least once. A man booed in his own country, who never stopped representing it. A head case, according to the data, who held his body together longer than almost anyone in his generation. A groom who played a professional match on his wedding day because at that point, the boundary between the man and the athlete had become impossible to locate. He found it in the end. The boundary. Himself. The coffee. The morning. Some players leave the sport with trophies. Some leave with records. Philipp Kohlschreiber left with something quieter, and in its own way, more complete. The knowledge that he had finally, after 2 decades, stopped being afraid of the score. What would it take for you not to win, but to finally stop keeping score?